I thank you for watching this program. I'm expressing this um, to TikTok because Greta Thunberg has um, explained why people who have long been concerned with the condition of the earth and the attention people in charge of civilization bring to attend to the condition of the earth need to reach out through available channels. And she said that TikTok was one of the available channels that we should um, invest our time in outreach concerning. Ecocide, which means the destruction of the entire earth. Mass extinction, which means the destruction of the biodiversity enjoying life on earth, and ultimately um, holocide, the destruction of ourselves. You see a painting behind me called The Hand Wringer. I don't believe we can afford to wring our hands of responsibility to change. There's, of course, complications, many of them, that come from the history of our industrialization processes. Industrialization largely began in the late 19th century, and so did some of the difficult social arrangements attending industrialization. People who feel that the earth has been ill fated have wondered what would have happened if James Garfield had survived in the United States. If Abraham Lincoln had had time to stop the robber barons, child labor. He founded Gallaudet University for the deaf. As you can see, I'm among the deaf. And of course, he corresponded with Karl Marx, according to legend. So he was concerned about the worker. Could we have avoided the terrible results of the senseless slaughters of both world wars? Who knows? The past is complicated. One of the complications of the past, I think, needs to be very clearly explained, which is that war loans and automobile loans were pushed through Congress at the same time, meaning that the way that the automobile became a necessity that has cruelly compromised our relationship with the planet around us was part of a mindset geared up by political powers for senseless slaughter and the enrichment of robber barons and what we now call oligarchs, that I call leapfrog oligarchs, traipsing across national boundaries. Of course, all people in power, no matter how corrupt they may be, are aware of these issues, and some of the people in power are steeling themselves to address these issues and be held accountable to public perceptions about those issues. I'm not going to make any pitch for any politician or any political society, but I think we all know that the tyranny of a small group of people has compromised the welfare of the rest of us, and we need to get that under control. We need to change our distributive practices so that There's fair sharing of food resources, water resources, medical resources, and education for all that is in harmony with our respective necessities for reconciling with what we are doing to ourselves by destroying the planet. Now, when it comes to ecology, it's a very complicated subject that I do not know by rote, but I am aware that there are things that are happening in the world around us that we need to understand much better. And so I have taken some time to study people who are deeply committed to scholarship in the area of geological change. One of these people came out in the 80s. His name was Richard Buckminster Fuller. He believed that a high quality of life could be achieved with a minimum drain on the overall ecological system, to use the words of Frank Herbert, for all people. He even said that the universe is irrevocably intent on making the human race omni-considerate and omni-successful, despite our overwhelming ignorance and fear. And he proceeded through an ecological study of resources and technological change, which he realized, as I realized at that time, were being senselessly diverted for weapons of mass destruction, to prove this thesis and prove it he succeeded in doing in a book published in 1981 called Critical Path, which is very timely because at the time he said we're facing chemical irretrievability if we continue at the present rate and conduct. Recently, Greta Thunberg summarized the views of a whole cabinet of official scientists and laypersons who have long worked in the field. Her climate book is essential reading for all lay people. It covers what we face, what carbon dioxide is, what sort of climate change has happened in the geological past, what the consequences were. It addresses that we haven't changed and why we haven't changed and why we didn't take action, what we need to do, and what will happen if we do not. Most people realize that the climate is changing just by their own firsthand experience of what we call weather. There's a difference between climate and weather, and it's important not to get the two issues confused. Climate is the general tendencies, the seasons. Weather is just what happens on a given day. The weather is changing so dramatically that we call it climate change. There are permanent disruptions of our seasons, leading to drought, wildfires, melting of ice, which results in reduction of the white coating of ice, known as the albedo, which reflects sunlight into the outer space. So it absorbs more heat and warms more ice, and it starts raising the ocean levels as well as the ocean temperatures, leading to the carbonic acid that eats away at the very roots of the food cycle. So we have acidifying oceans as a result of climate change. It's important to realize that industrial processes led to um, exclusionary processes as well. Henry Ford, who was decorated by Nazi Germany, was an employer of many, many black people, as Detroit still is an employer of many, many black people. And at the time, he did it in return for their willingness not to unionize. Of course, they're unionized now. And they have historically had hard attitudes towards people who were non union members. There's reasons why unions are very important, but there's also reasons why we need to connect with our obligations to the human race. My scholarship and a college student went into such issues as our obligation to understand and assimilate refugees from countries where our own high command had committed questionable acts of war, resulting in the refugee problems about which we are told to complain bitterly. I don't believe we should complain bitterly about our connectivity to the human race. We should praise God that we're connected to one another. So, when we look at the many issues that pertain to the history of the sad affair that we face in climate change, we need to know specifically our place in time and our potentials now. That is one of the reasons why I think, for one thing, the industrial history provided by Buckminster Fuller and Critical Path is reasonable expectation to be familiar with, particularly on the part of people in labor and industry. Second, I believe that families all over the world will benefit by reading Greta Thunberg's climate book. I think it's essential reading. It's accessible, it's deep, it's mind expanding, it's eye opening, and best of all, she gives the proceeds to charity to help people who are suffering climate change, because one of the major stumbling blocks to acceptance of our responsibility is integrating the moral conscience that comes with awareness that the people who are producing the most industrial toxins resulting in these feedback loops have consequences for faraway people who contribute the least. So we have a moral responsibility to own up, stand up, and shoulder some responsibility for protecting the people of the world who are the most vulnerable. The United Nations established an Office of Sustainable Development. UNICEF has made major strides towards ending hunger. Doctors Without Borders is wonderful in going places, putting themselves at risk, sharing time and medicine with the world's poor. We need rapid deployment forces that are humanitarian. I repeat, we need mercy forces, rapid deployment forces that are humanitarian. We need conscientious media who can stop promoting Hollywood with all its brutality, violence, and celebrity fixation, and put up an international switchboard where we are aware of and monitor equity in distribution of the Earth's resources and upgrade our response time to the world's emergencies. I'm not talking about the man-made emergencies of military chauvinism. I'm talking about the tragedies that happen, for example, when there's an earthquake or a drought. We have the tools, the imagination, the character, the soul force, as Mahatma Gandhi would call it, satyagraha, to stand up for the most vulnerable among us. And it's time to stop pretending that people who tell us we don't mean well, because we do. And the world is at risk.